Well, keep in mind that Europe is Rome, disintegrated. So when the imperialist powers began to expand, even came to America, America was settled by Romans, disintegrated. That's why there was no problem to bring over slaves, because after all, they were not born with the traits. So people were then perceived as subhumans. The word sub means below. And so slavery was quite automatic and natural. After all, you were not born with the traits. And the traits of the Aryan race was blonde hair and blue eyes and a Roman nose. So if you didn't have fair skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair, you were automatically a subhuman. Therefore, you know there was no hope for me. And so for the American culture 200 years ago to perceive people from Africa as not fully human was natural. It was a Greek philosophy exported by the Romans, disintegrated into Europe. In this segment, I am going to be continuing on the subject of leaders in the kingdom, and we want to, in the day sessions, deal with attitudes, rediscovering the attitudes that create the leader inside of you, that separate you from followers. We were attempting last night to lay a foundation because I wanted to make sure that everyone in this conference understand that all of us were created to be leaders, but not necessarily of people. And one of the challenges that we are facing in the world today is that our philosophy of leadership has been produced by Greeks and Romans rather than by Christ. When I went to college, which was a Christian college here in Tulsa, I was shocked to find out as a freshman that the first required reading that they put on my list of books was the writings of Plato. It was required reading. Every university does that. As a matter of fact, I doubt any one of you sitting in this room who graduated from university were not required to study the writings of Aristotle, Plato, or Socrates. And that's because our entire society, all of our universities, all of our philosophical understandings come from Greek philosophy. I sat there reading the books, the writings of these great philosophers, and discovered that their ideas was the foundation of our social, cultural, and political environment. For example, the Greeks were the ones who introduced the word demokrate. It was born in Greece. It became the idea or the ideology that created our present governing system. It's a Greek governing system. It's called democracy. It didn't come from the Bible. It came from Greece. The Romans conquered the Greeks, and the Romans became the most powerful government on earth. They built an army that was so strong that no country in the known world at that time could defend themselves against Rome. Romans were interesting people. The Greeks were philosophers, but the Romans were utilitarians. What that means is the Greek talked about it, the Romans applied it. The Romans did not destroy the Greek philosophy. They kept it. Matter of fact, they protected the libraries of the Greeks, and the Greeks' philosophy was adopted by the Romans and created their leadership philosophy. There are 5 specific principles of Greek philosophy concerning leadership that were adopted by the Romans. It's important to understand that the Romans still exist today. When Rome fell apart, it produced what we call Europe. Europe is Rome disintegrated. Romans ruled from England to Africa. So all the nations in Europe, from England to Africa, live on the philosophical foundation of Greek philosophy, which was exported by the Romans, and the Romans educated, ruled, and they controlled the thinking of the world. In my book, Becoming a Leader, which I trust you will get a copy of, I did a couple of chapters in that book on Greek philosophy, and I called it The Misconceptions of Leadership. Misconceptions. Because the Greek philosophy, in my view, based in comparison to the Bible was a misconception. For example, one of the things that the Greeks believed was that some people were born to lead and some were born to follow. So if you happen to be in the class that was born to follow, no matter how much education, degrees you achieve, they concluded you will always be a slave. That's Greek philosophy. The Romans adopted that. Secondly, the Greeks believed that leadership was a product of birth traits. A birth trait to a Greek thought was that certain people were born with certain traits that made them leaders. The rest of us who didn't have those traits were forever relegated to the masses of slaves. That was Greek philosophy. The Romans believed that. And that is why the Romans believed that certain people were born with certain traits, and they were the founders of what they call the Aryan race, which is a Roman term. Hitler adopted the same ideology. That's why he killed people, because to him they were not fully people. Well, keep in mind that Europe is Rome, disintegrated. So when the imperialist powers began to expand, even came to America, America was settled by Romans, disintegrated. That's why there was no problem to bring over slaves, because after all, they were not born with the traits. So people were then perceived as subhumans. The word sub means below. And so slavery was quite automatic and natural. After all, you were not born with the traits. And the traits of the Aryan race was blonde hair and blue eyes and a Roman nose. So if you didn't have fair skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair, you were automatically a subhuman. Therefore, you know there was no hope for me. And so for the American culture 200 years ago to perceive people from Africa as not fully human was natural. It was a Greek philosophy exported by the Romans, disintegrated into Europe. Am I clear? Jesus meant that philosophy in power when he came to earth 2,000 years ago. The Romans ruled the world when Jesus was born. Jesus Christ was therefore automatically considered a subhuman to a Roman. He was born under the law, the Bible says. Under the law. He was born in Palestine, a little town called Bethlehem. He grew up in Nazareth, a village with 1 street and 11 houses. So these people in Palestine were considered as subhumans. And that is why the Romans actually could control them, levy taxes on them, and also make them carry their shield and swords whenever they want to. After all, they were born to just serve the superior race. Jesus knew that the disciples were brought up in this conditioning. He knew that they were trained in that environment. So when he chose them, he knew that they were corrupted in their leadership perception. So one of the statements he made to them is one that hopefully we will discuss on our Wednesday. When they began to vie for leadership, they began to jockey for position. Because remember that Greek philosophy was that you were chosen by providence to be a leader. That was the Greek philosophy. In other words, the gods chose who would be leaders, and the gods chose who would be slaves. The Romans believed that. The Greeks believed that. And so Europe believes that. The disciples had a problem. They believed it too. And so one of the philosophies of Greek leadership perception also is that leadership is a result of charismatic personality. That's a Greek philosophy. Matter of fact, the word charisma actually means gifts of the gods, plural. Charisma is a Greek term. It meant those who were gifted by the gods. So if you were gifted by the gods, you were automatically in the leadership category. If you didn't have the gifts of the gods, then you were automatically a slave and subjugated. And that's where the development came for worshiping men. That was the height of humanism. Matter of fact, the Greeks worshiped the human body as being the most highly valued product on the planet. They invented humanism in a sense. The Romans adopted that. So the Romans also believed, therefore, that they were superior humans. They had the gifts of the gods. Matter of fact, Caesar believed that he was the son of gods. Many of you who've read history, you know that this concept of men being sons of gods was the concept of the pharaohs, and the Romans believed it. And so this idea that the God gave gifts to the earth through these men, and they were leaders by the providence of the gods, therefore you could not resist the leaders. If you rebelled against Caesar, if you rebelled against Pharaoh, You were rebelling against the gods, and so you were deserving of death. I want you to think about the leadership problems. Those philosophies still exist today. And that's why the first book they make you read in college is Greek philosophy, not the Bible. The Bible's concept of leadership is completely opposite to that. Matter of fact, Jesus made these statements when the disciples were trying to be Greeks. They were trying to fight for authority, fight for position. Matter of fact, two of them, James and John, were so adamant about it, they put their mother up to talk to him about it. And they asked their mother to ask him to place them in the highest position at his right and left in his kingdom. And he was a little bit shocked at their audacity. His response to them was, do you know what you're asking? Interesting question. I think everybody in this room would like to be promoted. All humans have a desire to be in charge. They don't tell you. They don't say it. That's why the 10 became angry, if you remember the story. They became angry not at the 2. Why? Not because they didn't want the positions. They were angry because they beat them to it. I repeat, every human being has a desire to be great. Many of them don't talk about it, but they think about it all day. You do. Because the desire for greatness is natural. Write that down, please. The desire for greatness is natural. Even a slave wants to be the master, but he doesn't talk about it. No one likes to be oppressed. No human. Even the oppressed don't want to be oppressed. We all have a desire to be great. We have a desire to be in charge. And what's amazing to me is that the desire for greatness was not rebuked by Jesus. Matter of fact, his response to their passion for leadership was a positive. He did not rebuke them. James and John had the right attitude. They had the right desire. What they missed was the process. They wanted positions to be given to them. If Jesus Christ is Christ and he is God, then he should appoint them to be leaders. After all, the Romans believed the same thing. The gods gifted men to be leaders. So they were trying to get leadership by divine appointment. And Jesus asked them a question. He said, can you drink the cup I'm drinking? You want to sit where I'm sitting? Can you drink the cup I have to drink? The word cup is an idiom in the Hebrew, and it means price. It means cost. Write that down, please. Cup means what? Cost. That's why in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was talking about struggling with the price of the cross, he said, can you take this cup from me? And he was talking about, do I have to pay this price for them? He's talking about the cost of something. He said, every position of leadership has a cup with it. I'm not against you wanting to be great. I'm against you not wanting to drink your cup. The average human being wants a shortcut to greatness. And then he proceeded to do something very strange. He then began a seminar on leadership because he realized that the other 12 were angry, the other 2 were misguided, and everybody wanted power. They wanted to be great. And so he made the statement. He says, they said, yes, we can drink the cup. He said, you indeed will drink from my cup, but you won't drink my cup. You will taste death like me. And they did. James and John were killed in a very horrific way. He said, but to sit on my right and my left is not mine to give. Let me tell you something that's very important. You cannot pray for leadership. There is obviously a prayer that Jesus cannot answer. Let me repeat it again. He said, to sit on my right and my left is not mine to give. They were asking for what? Positions of leadership. You cannot pray for Jesus to give you a position of leadership. That's one prayer he said he cannot answer. I know you've been taught that Jesus can do anything, but according to Jesus, that's one thing he cannot do. He cannot give you the position of leadership that you are wanting. Very important. So no matter how you fast and pray for someone else's position, God can never give it to you. Why? He answers the next statement. He says, these positions belong to those for whom they have been prepared. That was his answer. In other words, there is a position for everybody in leadership, and no one can take your position. Hey, boy, say belong. Say it loud. Belong. Boy, what a beautiful word. Belong means no matter what they try to do, they can never be you, and they can never take your slot in God's leadership. Very important. He was destroying jealousy, competition, suspicion, fear, jockeying for position, scheming, the stuff that you do. And then he made this statement. I love it. And I'm going to be writing a book next year on this entire project. He said, "He who would be great." In other words, if you want to be great, let me tell you how. He did not rebuke their desire for greatness. Matter of fact, he liked it. To the point where he even showed them how to get it. It's a shock. You got to think about this. Most of you have been taught by Christianity that you shouldn't desire to be great. Because religion always gravitates against greatness, which is what bothers you in religion. That's why you fake it so well. You pretend to be humble, but you want to be great.